Hey, what up? Welcome back to another video on one of the YouTube channels ever, and I'm pretty sure you could already tell by the thumbnail or the title, but today we're going to be taking a look at a pretty rough situation. So recently, former YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki died at age 56 due to cancer. And if that news wasn't bad enough already, it gets that much worse when you realize her son also died 5 months ago. So on top of her battling cancer for the last 2 years, she also had to deal with watching her son die due to an overdose. Now, if you're anything like me, you're probably not only surprised by her age, but also the fact that she had cancer. And I obviously know that most people probably aren't keeping constant tabs on the former YouTube CEO, but if information came out that someone like that did have cancer, you'd think much more people would know. And on the topic of being surprised by things, what's honestly more surprising than her even having cancer is people's responses to this situation. And don't get me wrong, I definitely knew that she was a generally disliked person, but to this extent is crazy. And before we even get into some of the comments and responses, I did want to point out that there are some good ones. It's not all bad, so we're gonna take a look at a few of the good ones first, starting with this one from Phantom saying, "Nah, WTF, rest in paradise." Then we got one from the user K, first her son and now herself. May their souls rest in peace. And we even got Alex Jones making appearance here, not necessarily supporting her or anything, but feel like I needed to toss this in here, but dead from the cancer injections. I also feel like I needed to toss that one in there because there's a decent amount of people saying that the reason that she even got cancer in the first place was from the COVID vaccines, and I guess I'll let you guys be the judge of that. But moving on to the next response, we got one from Grande right here that says, "RIP, she actually tried to communicate and listen to YouTubers, but arrived at an unlucky time when everyone was pulling ads from YouTube and ended up getting way more hate than she deserved." And I guess after he posted this comment, he got into a bit of a back and forth with the user Stefan, because he responded with, "Dude, she removed the dislike button and despite huge backlash, refused to do anything about it. Stop being a bootlicker and stop denying her horrible job just because she died at a young age. She did a horrible job and deserves to be called out for it." And Grande responded back with, "Bro, no need to get so heated about a dislike button. I also disagree with its removal, but dislike bombing videos for the stupidest of reasons had become a widespread thing, which festered mob hate culture on YouTube. So I can also understand the arguments for removing it." And after reading that little back and forth between these two, that kind of leads into one of the major problems that people had with her, and that being the removal of the dislike button. And I'm going to start this off by saying I was never really a big fan of them removing the dislike button, but when it comes down to it, I don't really think it matters too much because there's a ton of different extensions that you can use to get it back, and on top of that, there's some pretty good arguments for both sides. Because like you've seen in Grande's response, he brought up a great point that the dislike button really just turned into something to help fuel the hate culture on YouTube. And instead of it being used for its original point of you just disliking a video that you didn't really enjoy, huge groups of people just started using it as something to dislike bomb a video that they slightly disagree with. But of course, in the same way that it could be used for bad, it had its benefits as well. Probably the main one being is to actually be able to reliably tell if a video is any good or not. And one of the best examples of it being useful is especially in the tutorial / informative type videos. And that's really honestly the main reason that I downloaded an extension to get the dislikes back. There's nothing worse than going to some sort of informative video that you need to figure out how to do something, and then getting like 4 or 5 minutes into it to realize that it's completely useless and they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. So the dislike button would be super useful in a situation like that where you could not only save yourself a ton of time, but potentially save yourself from making a bad decision. And I know that for most of the tutorials that are completely trash, you can still go to the comments and tell that it's completely trash, but it was just much easier when you could look at the dislikes and see that, damn, this has 400 dislikes and 1 like. It's probably not what I'm looking for. But the dislike button debate aside, because regardless, we're probably not getting it back, let's go back to the responses and take a look at what majority of them look like. Deserved for doubling ads. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. She was the woman who ruined YouTube. So cancer just killed cancer. I will always remember her for ruining YouTube. Ruined YouTube. Horrendous individual in all respects. She was a petty tyrant who actively worked to take away people's rights. I don't have anything nice to say about her. And there's a ton more comments like this, even one saying that she's caused countless deaths. I can't find that comment, but I definitely did read it. I don't know if it's been taken down or what, but after reading these comments, if you didn't know who she was, you'd honestly probably think that she's the reincarnation of Satan himself. And I'm not gonna sit here and act like she was the best CEO that we've ever seen ever, because she definitely wasn't. She's had her flaws and she definitely didn't do everything right, but the way that people are talking about her, you'd think that she single-handedly destroyed YouTube. And speaking of single-handedly destroying YouTube, that really kind of leads into the next thing that people were really upset at her about, and I'm gonna go ahead and read this post right here because it explains what people are thinking pretty well. And it says, the amount of history rewriting in the comments is incredible. Susan brought in mass demonetization, a system so broken at first that hundreds of thousands of creators lost their jobs/side hustles. If a Walmart CEO did something like this, they'd be amongst the most hated. Even today, it regularly makes glaring mistakes, and being able to speak to a normal human at YouTube is near impossible. Now, before I even give any of my thoughts on this, like I just said a second ago, I don't want to make it seem like I'm 100% defending everything she's ever done, because I'm not, but I feel like there's a good amount of stuff that people are mad at her about that's either slightly wrong or misguided. And getting into one of honestly the biggest misconceptions about her is that she's single-handedly the overseeing eye, the deciding factor, and the sole reason for any change on YouTube. Which is of course not true, but a lot of people see it that way because since she's the CEO, she was pretty much the face of YouTube and the easiest person to pin the blame on. Because when it really comes down to it, it seems like a lot of people forget that YouTube is owned by Google. Anytime any major change comes out on YouTube, that change is made by all the higher ups at Google, the people that own YouTube, and pretty much just pushed out by YouTube's CEO. So she definitely wasn't the single deciding factor and the iron fist in what decisions were made with YouTube. And speaking of big decisions being made on YouTube, one of the main ones that people had a problem with other than the dislike button was the much stricter regulations that ended up with a ton of channels being either demonetized or completely taken down. But like you also seen in that post, it specifically says a system so broken at first, which no one's gonna argue that yeah, at first the system was completely broken. Channels were being falsely demonetized, striked, and even taken down in some cases. And while there are a ton of channels that never recovered from it by either never getting their monetization back or never recovering their actual channel, there is also what I think is the majority of channels that did end up getting their problems resolved. And like he said in the post as well, the system does still have problems to this day, but when it comes down to it, what system doesn't have problems? And that's of course not to say that we shouldn't strive for a better system, but it is to say that we can't really get overly angry at her for not having a perfect system, especially when it was newer. And what a lot of people seem to forget is the demonetization didn't only unintentionally hit good channels, it also hit a bunch of channels that really shouldn't have been profiting from YouTube monetization in the first place. And while we're on this topic of the demonetization and strict rules, a lot of people only really look at the downsides that came with that. And while sure, it isn't really nice feeling like you're stepping on eggshells no matter what you say on YouTube, it did also lead to a ton of good things, with probably the main one of those being that you could make significantly more money on YouTube than you were able to before. In the same way that a ton of different creators sadly did lose their side jobs or side careers, a ton of them were also able to make careers and profit heavily off of it. Because with the stricter rules pretty much taking away anything that wasn't really advertiser friendly, the said advertisers were willing to pay much more money, which of course eventually trickled down to the creators. And the last point that I wanted to bring up is how he talks about how now it's basically impossible to talk to an actual human at YouTube, which which kinda ties into what we were just talking about with the demonetization, and it's also something that Susan really never gets any credit for, and that's actually being the face of YouTube and genuinely talking to people. Because during that time that a ton of channels were getting falsely demonetized and taken down, there were a ton of larger creators that said they were actually able to get into contact with Susan and be able to resolve a lot of those issues. And on top of her actually responding to some of the creators, she also made several appearances in different videos talking about different things about YouTube, which I can already say is far more than the current YouTube CEO has done, because not only have I not heard literally anything good or bad from him at all since he's became the CEO of YouTube, but around the time that he was just getting into that CEO position, there was a bunch of clips going around of him basically not even knowing anything about YouTube whatsoever. I forgot exactly what it was, but it was a clip showing off how he didn't even know how to do like a specific thing on YouTube. I think it was something like how to access a stream or access something. I forgot what it was because it was a while ago and I can't really find the clip, but regardless, the guy that's the new CEO pretty much doesn't know anything about YouTube whatsoever. And this is all really just to say that Susan is honestly getting much more hate than she should, and I definitely understand disliking her, but I also think that a lot of the blame is either blown out of proportion or just straight up misguided. And even though I do agree that her time at YouTube wasn't really the best, I also don't really think that's a reason to either wish death upon someone or start celebrating their actual death. But with that said, that's pretty much it talking about Susan Wojcicki passing away and her time at YouTube. And if you made it this far into the video, you probably liked something and you already know the whole deal. Subscribe or else I'm gonna rip your balls off. I'm not gonna hold y'all for too long. This video was already much longer than I intended for it to be, so I'll catch you guys in the next one.